When I call on the light of my soul, I come home. Barhu, dear one, Shekhinah, holy name. When I call on the light of my soul, I come home. One more time. Barhu, dear one, Shekhinah, holy name. When I call on the light of my soul, I come home. When I call on the light of my soul, I come home. I'm lighting a candle now. If your eyes are closed, that's fine. You don't have to watch. And this candle is for each of you, honoring the road that has brought you to this moment, blessing you and inviting you to take refuge in this morning of contemplative stillness and fullness, that your cup may be filled moving forward, giving thanks to the ancestors who surround us, the unseen beings who guide us on our way. Amen. If you haven't already done so, I now invite you to either allow your eyes to close or simply drop your gaze and turn inward for a few moments. I'm going to ring a bell to begin and then guide you into the silence and then bring you out with another bell and a reading. So I invite you to begin by taking 3 deep, full breaths at your own pace, inhaling all the way and then holding the inhalation for as long as you can before letting all the breath go and holding the exhalation for as long as you can. So 3 times at your own pace. Inhaling deeply, retaining the breath, exhaling completely, and holding the out breath. Feeling the way each breath washes through every cell of your body, both calming and energizing, revitalizing, life force coursing through you with every breath, lingering on the threshold between the breaths, fearlessly exploring the experience of breathing in and breathing out. And whenever you've taken your 3 deep, full breaths, simply breathe naturally, becoming intimate with your breath, allowing it to be the touchstone of your meditation. Taking a moment now to scan your body with your mind's eye, noticing exactly how you're feeling right now, physically and also emotionally, allowing yourself to be however you are, not necessarily trying to change anything, simply noticing, although you're always welcome to make adjustments so that you can be more comfortable and present. Really take your seat in your seat. Find yourself rooted comfortably in this moment, in this body, such that it is, in whatever state you find yourself. Notice the weight of your body in your seat, and know that that substance is blessed and connected to our Mother, the Earth, that you belong to her. Feel your body rooted to her body, intertwined with her. Take your rightful place on this earth now as we sit. And at the same time, feel a gentle lifting from the crown of your head, connecting you to the vastness of the mystery, the unseen realms that guide and sustain you. Feel yourself perfectly suspended between the heavens and the earth, rooted and lifted, welcomed and held. And if this practice feels comfortable to you, please choose now a sacred word or phrase to be your companion in the next few minutes as we sit together in the quiet. I'm going to recommend the word shalom in Hebrew, peace, although you are not, of course, obligated to use that word. I'm just offering it. And it doesn't have to be a mantra that you repeat continuously, but rather, as we've been taught in the beautiful tradition of centering prayer, your sacred word becomes a touchstone for your beautiful wandering mind, welcoming it home again and again to this present moment. A poem, Mother Wisdom Speaks by Christine Lore Weber. Mother Wisdom Speaks. Some of you I will hollow out. I will make you a cave. I will carve you so deep the stars will shine in your darkness. You will be a bowl. You will be the cup in the rock collecting rain. I will hollow you with knives. I will not do this to make you clean. I will not do this to make you pure. You are clean already. You are pure already. I will do this because the world needs the hollowness of you. I will do this for the space that you will be. I will do this because you must be large, a passage. People will find their way through you, a bowl. People will eat from you, and their hunger will not weaken them to death. A cup to catch the sacred rain. My child, do not cry. Do not be afraid. Nothing you need will be lost. I am shaping you. I am making you ready. Light will flow in your hollowing. You will be filled with light. Your bones will shine. The round open center of you will be radiant. I will call you brilliant one. I will call you child who is wide. I will call you transformed. And so, Shabbat Shalom, everyone. Shabbat Shalom. Peaceful Sabbath to you. From my tradition to yours, my ancestral tradition, that is, of Judaism. It's only one of my beloved spiritual paths. I'm a little bit on the promiscuous side when it comes to spirituality. I am just in love with the beloved in every form that I encounter the beloved across the landscape of the world's great religions and spiritual traditions. So I was born into a non-religious Jewish family. Okay, anti-religious. My parents were kind of like Marx in that way. Religion was the opiate of the masses. Religion was a bad thing that put people to sleep and allowed them to commit atrocities in the name of some kind of fictitious daddy in the sky. So I grew up with that suspicion of religion, which not only didn't stop me from, but probably compelled me into the arms of every religion I encountered. Although seems to have rendered me incapable of actually signing on to one of them, because of that critical gaze that my family instilled in me. So while I love the mystical traditions and am my heart is wide open to the presence of the sacred in all of them, I do have difficulty with anything resembling, blind faith or adherence to a particular set of beliefs, a belief system that doesn't involve some degree of inquiry or God wrestling, as some of the Jewish renewal teachers call it, like Jacob wrestling all night with the angel and being renamed in the morning when he prevailed, Israel.
Neil10Hugh@gmail.com. That's
There we go. So some God wrestling is not other than faith, but part of a living faith. And I have this feeling that you guys there are very familiar with this God wrestling and unafraid of the stillness and the silence and the emptiness with which we began this little gathering, because they're interconnected, right? That fearless embrace of silence and stillness and innerness, and a willingness to question and grapple what's called in Islam the real jihad, the great jihad. There's the lesser and the greater jihad. The greater jihad is that striving to align ourselves with love again and again, with love, with God as love. So I know that that's the path that you also are on. And what I hope for in this gathering this morning, maybe you've already received a taste of what my prayer is for you, that you can enter this time together as a refuge, as a Sabbath. You don't have to be Jewish in order to say yes to this day as a mitzvah. A mitzvah in Hebrew, as you probably know, is this beautiful combination of commandment and blessing, of responsibility and invitation. So that when we keep the Sabbath holy, in whatever form we can that fits the shape of your own life, then you have risen to a deep soul call, and you are also being washed with the blessing of rest and renewal and a pause from all of the compulsions, all of the to-dos that drive us the rest of the time. It's interesting that we find ourselves now during this COVID-19 pandemic in a kind of enforced Sabbath space, many of us. Of course, there are those on the margins who do not have the privilege of turning inward right now and connecting with their souls in silence and stillness and some voluntary simplicity. And there are those, of course, on the front lines who are being pressed every moment. There are people like your beloved priest Judith, who are taking care of 5 children in her home right now, trying to educate them and care for them, help them navigate this time, and maintain some semblance of sanity in ourselves, in yourselves. So there's a whole range of experiences unfolding right now during this time of sheltering in place and social distancing and the shutting down of many of the systems and structures that we have become accustomed to and have taken for granted. Wherever we are in that spectrum of experience right now during this strange and liminal time, we have the opportunity to cultivate a kind of inward turning, reckoning, recalibration, and also a deep drink of the space, the sacred space that opens when we're not distracted by the constant demand to do and make and consume, the tyranny of tasks that bosses us around most of the time. So I'd like to read to you a little passage about that from my new book, Wild Mercy, and see if it in some way invites you into a Sabbath space now that you can cultivate on some kind of regular basis that works, that resonates with your own particular life and spiritual path. Laying down our burden, keeping the Sabbath holy. Here, come here. Take a moment to set aside that list you've been writing in fluorescent ink, the list that converts tasks into emergencies. Items like feed the orchids become, if I don't accomplish this by 11 a.m. tomorrow morning, the rainforests are going to dry up and it will be all my fault. Or if I fail to renew my automobile insurance, I will probably crash my car and everyone will die. Or this friend just had her breast biopsied and that friend's brother-in-law beat up her sister, and my aunt just lost her job with the symphony, and my nephew is contemplating divorce, and I must call them all and listen to them for an hour each and dispense redemptive advice. Gather your burdens in a basket in your heart. Set them at the feet of the mother. Say, take this, great mama, because I cannot carry all this shit for another minute. And then crawl in her broad lap and nestle against her ample bosom and take a nap. When you wake, the basket will still be there, but half its contents will be gone, and the other half will have resumed their ordinary shapes and sizes, no longer masquerading as catastrophic, epic, chronic, and toxic. The mother will clear things out and tidy up. She will take your compulsions and transmute them, but only if you freely offer them to her. So what about you? Do you have a to-do list that you've written in fluorescent ink that converts tasks to emergencies? During this pandemic and during this day, we have the invitation to lay it down. The shoulds, the musts, the if we don't, the sky is gonna fall. There's this way in which many of the world's spiritual traditions offer us these treasures, these spiritual practices, like Sabbath practices, like Lent or Yom Kippur or Ramadan. We're in Ramadan right now in the Islamic tradition. Meditation practice in the so-called Eastern traditions of Buddhism and Hinduism. All of these great spiritual methods have been given to us and often presented to us through a masculine model in which we are encouraged, we're conditioned to use these methodologies as cudgels to bludgeon ourselves, to beat ourselves into submission, so that meditation practice becomes this iron grip on our minds so that we won't think too much. Bring your awareness gently, they say, back to the breath. But that invitation to gently bring your awareness back to the breath often has an underlying quality of, if you don't, you're doing it wrong. Like, it's okay, it's not that you're supposed to stop your thoughts. We all know that's impossible. But if you think too much, you're bad and wrong and not spiritual. Like these underlying patriarchal messages of, you must purify your impure self. You must perfect your flawed being in order to be worthy of the presence of the holy. One of my beloved teachers, Thomas Keating, speaks about centering prayer and that sacred word or phrase that you choose as a kind of portal, as a way of consenting to the divine presence. That to me is very invitational and feminine. The Shekhinah in Jewish mystical teachings is the indwelling feminine presence of God. She is not as Eve Ilson, Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, another one of my beloved teachers, widow, says, the Shekhinah is not Mrs. God. The Shekhinah is the divine presence. And it's the feminine, she. And so Shabbat becomes this welcoming space, not another item on the spiritual to-do list, not another place where you have to prove your worthiness, but an invitation to dwell in the holiness that you are. And so any kind of Sabbath space, whether it's sheltering in during this pandemic or actually naming a day a week or a weekend a month as a conscious welcoming of the Sabbath and keeping the Sabbath holy, is an opportunity to rest in that nurturing, feminine, wild, chaotic, creative space of embodied spirituality. Take a look at the time here. Okay, we're doing fine. I hope you're doing fine. I'm doing fine. So there are qualities to this feminine spirit that I'd like to explore for a few minutes. And please know that when I'm speaking about the feminine nature of the Holy One, I'm not speaking of a gendered God, and I'm not speaking of women's attributes as opposed to men's attributes, although you may recognize some characteristics that are often reflected in the domain of femaleness and maleness. But I'm speaking about the feminine in all of us. Like Jung spoke about the masculine and feminine, the anima and the animus that lives in all of us, in women, in men, in people of all genders and people of no gender identification. I'm speaking of the feminine in all of us, and I'm speaking to the thirst for feminine reality, feminine energy that resides in all of us, that we all seem to long for. There's this deep sort of communal recognition. It's not universal, but it's almost universal, that the masculine paradigm has done great damage to our social systems and to our mother, the earth. And that by reclaiming the feminine in our spiritual traditions, in our social structures, in politics, in academia, in entertainment, in the arts, everywhere, by reclaiming the feminine and recentering feminine voices, we have hope of navigating through this time of turmoil and uncertainty into a world of greater interconnectedness and respect and love and relationship and honoring of each other and the earth who sustains us. This is a feminine value. There's something also about the feminine that is at home with the mystery. Like that's her landscape, the landscape of mystery. It's why in the Taoist tradition, where you have the symbol of yin yang, the feminine, the yin is dark. That's not, in the Western mind, we see dark as evil. But in most other non-Western cultures, the darkness is that place of fertility and mystery, where the roots of the tree are doing deep work. deep beneath the earth in the darkness of winter. The dark night of the soul in the Christian tradition isn't about depression or tragedy or necessarily any external circumstances, although external circumstances can be an opportunity to enter into and say yes to assent to the spiritual crisis known as the dark night of the soul, which is a transformational state of radical not knowing, radical unknowing. This is holy ground, not knowing. When our belief systems come undone, when the structures that had propped us up, the false structures of ideology and dogma, crumble. What Richard Rohr calls the disorder phase. There's this order phase where we say yes to our religious tradition, to our faith. We rest in that. And then at some point, it has to unravel if we are to mature. The disorder phase is vitally important, and it sucks. It's uncomfortable. It's messy, scary. And it's hard to communicate to anyone else, especially the people who still belong to the system that is crumbling before our eyes. And then that reorder phase, that's also the domain of the feminine. Because we can't actually intentionally reorder our souls on the other side of our dark nights of unraveling, of our spiritual meltdowns. We can't stick ourselves back in the freezer and try to come back into hard form again. It's a surrender. There's a point at which in that dismantling process, we have to let ourselves down into the flames that are consuming us and allow grace to happen, or not, but allow ourselves to be remade by that which we love, which is love itself. And we can't bend that process to our own will, although it is a co-creative process. Like, we have to show up. One of the sayings I love in Islam is trust in God and tie your camel. We do our part as we move forward. But first, no rush to reorder from the disorder. You know, this time of the pandemic and the strangeness of the world is uncomfortable. It is messy. It can be downright painful if we are ill, or if someone we love is ill, if we're struggling to financially survive or take care of our families, our loved ones. It's painful knowing that those on the margins are suffering the most. Our feminine heart feels the pain of the world in the cells of our own bodies, and we should let the suffering break our hearts open so that we have a greater capacity to love. And yet, and also, in this time of uncertainty and discomfort, there is this deep wellspring of life-giving breath, stillness, an enforced confrontation with the beauty of our own soul. And I don't know how long this is going to last. None of us do. And I don't know what the world is going to look like on the other side of this pandemic. None of us do. But what I want to say is this. All too soon, we're going to be thrust back in to the doingness, to the busyness, to the demands of life. For many of you, that's probably already the case. But underlying that busyness, those compulsions that drive us, there is this new access to this pool of stillness, to this deep elixir of well-being that we have access to now by virtue of having stopped the sort of blind driven activities that many of us have been engaged in. And I want for you to drink deeply of this blessing of in between, this liminal space that is so holy, because it'll be over. Don't squander it. This Shekhinah, the indwelling feminine presence, is with you to nurture and sustain your intention to be present to this holy time of liminality, of in-betweenness, of mystery, ambiguity, paradox. Drink it in. And here's why. If you're looking for a why, like why should I deserve to cultivate this Sabbath space when so much of the world is suffering, or whatever your storyline might be, which I agree with. Like I also have that story, and there's validity to the concern about our privilege in light of other people's sufferings. Like we must always pay attention to the fact that we walk through this world with a degree of privilege that most of the world doesn't have. Yes. And if we say yes to this Sabbath space that we're in, if we welcome the Shekhinah, the indwelling feminine presence, to infuse us and hold us, what we are able to cultivate in our souls during this time is, I promise you, exactly what is needed in the world and what will be needed as we walk into the new landscape on the other side of this time. So far from being self-indulgent, this opportunity to be still and quiet and inward turning and happy and joyful and connected to that wellspring of well-being is the medicine that you will carry into the world. My beloved lifelong teacher, Ram Dass, who many of you know is the author of the classic Be Here Now and many other books, who I had the great honor of studying with for decades and being friends with, who died recently and whose death I'm still grieving, taught about becoming that place of stillness and equanimity and joy in the face of chaos. So that even as things around us change and there's upheaval and fear and anxiety in the world around us, we can access and be a source of peace and well-being for others. That is such a gift. I know you know this, and the reason you bring people like me is just to remind you of what you already know. The wisdom in this particular circle is stunning. I can see it and I can feel it. And any one of you could be sitting in this seat today, offering some taste of the thing that we already know but that we nevertheless hunger for from each other. Thich Nhat Hanh, the great Vietnamese Zen teacher, who's also not long for this world, says that the next Buddha will be the Sangha. In Buddhism, you take refuge in the three jewels of the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. The teacher, you take refuge in the teacher, the life example of the Buddha, the awakened one. The Dharma, the body of teachings that he gave. And the Sangha, the circle of practitioners, of other beings on the path who are also practicing like your hair is on fire, is another phrase I love from Buddhism. You practice meditation or whatever the spiritual practices may be, as if your hair were on fire, and the practice, the contemplative practice, is the water that's going to put your flaming head out. Maybe a more feminine invitation would be, you go to your contemplative practices as a pool of pure sweet water, like the thirsty deer goes down to the water and drinks. So Thich Nhat Hanh said the next Buddha will be the Sangha. So Buddhism also has a belief, as does Christianity, in a kind of second coming of the Buddha, as does Judaism with the Messiah, which they're still waiting for. And although many contemporary Jews say the same thing Thich Nhat Hanh says in different language, that the Messiah isn't going to be some great awakened dude who has all the answers and is going to fix us, but rather the collective. And so that's what Thich Nhat Hanh is saying. We in Christianity, you would maybe say the church in the larger sense of the dwelling place of the Holy Spirit. That it's all of us, the Holy Spirit in all of us, the Shekhinah in us all, together, interconnected, that is going to deliver us to whatever new iteration of the human condition and creation itself is unfolding now in the darkness of not knowing. How are you doing? I hope you're okay with all these words. We're going to have some exchange in a few minutes. I want to speak for a moment about spiritual longing. I think for many of us who are, especially those of us who are older and have maybe been on a spiritual path for quite some time in our lives, or have been involved in our church communities or whatever it might be, we may look back into the early days of our spiritual lives, our conscious spiritual lives, and remember moments where we just felt like in love with God. We felt this sense of deep connection to spirit. Maybe it was Jesus, like, Jesus, I love you, be with me. And that there were times, perhaps in the midst of a beautiful liturgy, maybe singing a hymn, when you felt that almost intoxicating sense of both the presence of God, but also the absence of God, sometimes intertwined. Like your heart just ached, and it ached with the love and knowing that you are loved, but also with the sense of missing something or someone missing that you almost couldn't bear the absence of. Does this resonate with any of you? Or is it just me as an Enneagram 4? My life's always been about longing. Even if you've never experienced that kind of, that quality of spiritual yearning, I think you can probably at least get it from what I'm saying. And the mystics, the poets of all spiritual traditions, like Rumi in the Sufi tradition, or Mirabai, my namesake in the Hindu tradition, the Song of Songs in the Torah, in the so-called Old Testament, and so many of the Christian mystics, you can get a flavor for that love language that evokes the relationship between the soul and the divine. I feel like in a lot of our spiritual communities, longing has gotten a kind of bad rap. Like it's somehow an immature experience of an expression of spirituality, because we're supposed to know that we already have everything that our hearts could possibly desire, that God is present with us always. In Hinduism, it's from the Upanishads, it's Tatvam Asi. Thou art that. There's nothing to yearn for, nothing to long for, because you are that which you seek, especially in the non-dual traditions of Hinduism, of Advaita Vedanta. That it's all about waking up to the fact that you're not separate from the one you love, that separation is an illusion. Blah, blah, blah. All true. And yet, by discounting and splitting off from our heart's natural desire for God, for connection with the one, we are closing a door. In all of the great mystical traditions, the longing is the knock on the door. The yearning, the burning love, is the force that opens the gate. And we flow into that which we love. So our desire is not an obstacle, but an opening. Our experience of separation is not an illusion, but a calling to union, a welcoming into union, or what Julian of Norwich, the great medieval English mystic, called oneing. I had the great privilege of translating Julian of Norwich and into contemporary English from Middle English. She was a contemporary of Chaucer and was the first woman to write in English. And there were words that I changed so that readers could relate, but oneing, there's no other term like it. It's perfect description of that divine union, which Julian and all the mystics say the Holy One wants as urgently as we do. That in the language of love, the love language that belongs to the domain of the mystical, which is only a finger pointing at the moon, it's only metaphor, but in this love language, the soul is lover, God is beloved, and she, in the language of Christian mysticism, especially the Spanish mystics, who I've also had the great privilege of translating, John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila, the soul is she, feminine, lover, and God is he, beloved, the masculine. No matter whether the person is who is speaking to the Holy One or crying out to the Holy One is a woman or a man. In fact, John of the Cross is a beautiful example of that. All of his ecstatic, erotic exquisite love poetry to God is written in the voice of the feminine toward the masculine. And so much of John of the Cross's poetry and Teresa of Avila's poetry and the Sufi mystics is about the secret rendezvous of lover and beloved in the garden. And they often have to meet in the middle of the night when everything is dark. So no one will bother them and no one will see them. No one meaning all of the other faculties of the self that attempt to convince us that this love is wrong. And so lover and beloved meet in that secret garden and they merge. And when they merge, their individual identities melt, dissolve, disappear. So that in a sense, there's no one actually even there to experience divine union. Because the subject-object distinction of lover and beloved, of knower and known, of soul and divine is obliterated, and only love remains. This is dangerous shit, you guys. This disappearing, this dying before you die, as it says in all the mystical traditions, especially in Sufism. That's our task, is to die before we die. In Tibetan Buddhism, people actually practice in cemeteries consciously imagining their own death. This is a high spiritual practice, an advanced spiritual practice, is to consciously picture yourself dying. In this time when death is much more present than we are conditioned to be comfortable with, at least in the US, but in Western society in general, we have the opportunity to sit in the presence of death, of our own death, with our hearts open. I know many of you have experienced the proximity of your own death through a serious health diagnosis, or you have grieved and maybe are currently grieving with all your hearts the death of someone you love very much, maybe with whom you've had a complicated relationship, but who nevertheless informs your and has been so much entwined with your daily life. So I'm not talking to people who are unfamiliar with death, I know that. What I am doing is reminding us that we can open our hearts to death right now as the holy ground that it is. And allow this time of not knowing to be a surrender into our own unbecoming, unmaking, undoing. Not in a violent sense, but in the sense that our hearts have always probably longed for, whether we are in touch with it consciously or not. That desire to die before we die, so that we may emerge as who we truly are. During this time, many things are falling away. Many of the things that we thought, literal things that we thought we couldn't live with, we're discovering not only couldn't live without, not only can we live without, but it's a joyful place to be, to not be driven by that conditioning to be over-consumers on this dear earth that we share, but to lighten our footprint, to live more lightly, to live more intentionally, to release all of our thoughtless wanting and remember what we really want. to love and to be loved, to take our rightful place in this web of interconnection to which we belong, and to serve and tend that web of interbeing. That's what we really want. We want to know that we are held in the arms of a loving God, even if we don't believe in God in any of the ways that we used to. So I'm going to draw this to a close by just evoking my beloved auntie, Saint Teresa of Avila, Santa Teresa de Avila, whose masterworks, mystical masterworks, I've translated The Interior Castle and The Book of My Life, her autobiography. And Teresa was this beautiful balance between an ecstatic mystic on fire with longing for the beloved and an incredibly grounded, practical, no bullshit, human woman. She founded 17 convents and monasteries all over Spain, traveling by donkey cart, as part of this reform movement of returning the Carmelite order to its original values of contemplation, of silence and solitude and simplicity. The discalced Carmelite order, or the barefoot Carmelites, in honor of that contemplative value of simplicity and connection to what really matters. And she somehow found a way to weave into her life contemplative silence, inward turning focus, a constant saying yes to a loving conversation with the beloved, is what she called contemplative prayer, and still get so much good work done in the world. So she was a sacred activist. She was an activist and she was a contemplative. She was, as she said, Martha and Mary in one, not about herself, but about all of us. She says, Martha and Mary are sisters, and they both live in our souls, and they both deserve to be honored and lived through us. And she showed us the way to do that in all of her teachings. So I'm sure you're familiar with her, but if you're not intimate with her, I hope that you will become intimate with her, either through these translations of The Interior Castle and The Book of My Life, or I also wrote a little book, I don't have it in front of me, but maybe after the break I'll show you, called Teresa of Avila, Passionate Mystic. And it's a small book, and it's a meditation companion, and it's all my favorite bits of Teresa of Avila from all of her writings, including her poetry, with some kind of poetic reflections on her teachings. But she is the embodiment of that Sabbath energy of turning inward and then cultivating the fruits of that contemplative life as an offering of love to the world. So, my friends, I would love to take a few minutes till 1:30 to take some of your questions and reflections. And as we gather now and transition to that part of our time together, I just invite you to take a moment, take a breath to distill your question or your reflection to its essence so we can get to as many sharings as possible.
Thanks, Mirabai. So we'll just take a minute here together. When we take questions, you can raise your hand on the function on your computer. Melissa will call on you. You can also put a question in the chat box, and I'll scan that and offer this as well. All right. Mirabai, I'll ask a question while people are coming up with their pieces. I wondered if you could talk about, it's come up in our conversations when we talk about um, the self being um, be, becoming one and losing the self in the divine wanting. Um, that's tricky um, for us when we've really felt a liberation from the feminist world that has um, encouraged the fullness of the individual and the validity of the self, particularly in the world where the self is often annihilated. And so I'm curious how you respond to both the need to value the integrity of the individual um, and and the mystic union piece.
I'm so glad you asked that question, Judith. Such a beautiful and important question, especially in light of reclaiming the feminine in our spiritual lives. Um, because we have been, women especially, and men who have that feminine heart so strong, have been silenced by our religious institutions, and they have often, the patriarchy, if you will, has often used this teaching of mystical union and the annihilation of the small self as a veiled weapon to silence and marginalize our full flowering as human beings, as embodied, perfect as we are, people. So, the first thing I want to say is that when I speak about the feminine as abiding in the realm of mystery and being comfortable with ambiguity and not knowing, in fact thrives on not knowing in many ways, I also want to say that the feminine is the landscape of paradox. And so we are able, as Saint Teresa could hold in herself, this ecstatic contemplative life and this engaged life of service, without them canceling each other out and only enhancing each other, that the feminine spirit knows that we are both nothing and we are full, worthy, perfect, beautiful, luminous humans at the same time. So what is not has to die, what is invited to come undone is our illusions of separation from each other and from the one we love. Our false story of being unworthy and imperfect and impure, that we are loved into melting those obstacles that keep us from recognizing ourselves as absolutely perfect and beloved. It's the extraneous false stories that have to die so that we can actually be who we are. I actually, when I was writing the introduction to Dark Night of the Soul, which was my first book, a translation of Dark Night of the Soul, I drove from Taos, where I live, up to Snowmass, Colorado, to visit with Father Thomas Keating, who was a person I knew who understood these teachings the best. And I said, what am I going to say to people about John of the Cross's emphasis on nada, nothingness? That, this is a culture, especially for women, who have been told that we're not enough or we're too much, often in the same breath.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, it's not about unworthiness. It's the opposite. It's that when we release the illusion of separation, we recognize ourselves as truly beloved of of the holy, and then we can come into the fullness of who we actually are. So anyway, I write about this a lot in a lot of different places. The intro to Dark Night of the Soul, the introduction to the Book of My Life of Teresa of Avila, and in my memoir Caravan of No Despair, but also in this new book Wild Mercy. I really try to tackle that, and that's the best I can do in way too long an answer. I asked you guys to distill your questions, and I'm rambling on. So thank you for asking.
Is there another question?
It's a quiet group. I'm used to like trying to get through all the questions. It's never enough time.
Okay. I tell you what, why don't we have a break and maybe that'll give us an extra 5 minutes at the end for questions and people can distill all of everything you're saying. Um, all right.
Sounds great.
So we'll break for 15 minutes and we'll come back at 11:40. Peace.
Great. Thank you.
Hey, Mirabai.
Hi.
Hi. So several questions came up, and I think we'll just note those and we'll start with those. Well, we could do it either way. Do you want to start with those now, or do you want to um, move ahead and then take those at the end?
I think we should do it now because it's alive right now for people.
That sounds
Um, yeah, let's take just a few minutes, maybe 5 minutes, and then we'll still have time at the end for whatever arises then.
okay. Melissa, I think you can hear me. Let's start with Tamara, okay? If you can find her. Let's see. Maybe I can find you, Tamara.
I believe she's not going to ask the question, but we have some others in the group chat.
Okay. Okay. So let's see. The next one I see is from Gabrielle. No, that was a lovely comment. You should read that.
Yeah.
From Natalie. Are there any positives of masculine energy? If so, what does that look like? Should we have a balance of masculine and feminine within us? If so, how do we cultivate that?
Such great questions. So, I'll try to be as brief as possible. I mean, yes, I would say all the men in my life, all the men that I know, whether they started off as men or became men later, are embodiments of what I think is healthy and beautiful about the divine masculine. The the kind of strong care taking, holding, taking care of things. My own beloved just made sure that when I had a break, I had a cup of coffee. You may think of that as like um, a feminine thing of nurturing, but it's like the masculine version of that. And he fixes things and he figures things out. And when we're in the car, he figures out where we're going because I have a terrible sense of direction. There are so many ways that I depend upon his strong masculine caregiving and problem solving. And I can think of that in all of the men that are dear to me. There's also something about a lot of men right now who, especially privileged men, who are voluntarily abdicating their control and their power and their entitlement, and they're intentionally centering the voices of women and speaking of the divine from the pulpit if they're clergy people, using feminine pronouns. And to some people that might feel artificial and like silly almost at this point, but it's so important. When we talk about a balance of masculine and feminine, we should I would want for us to take into account 5,000 years of patriarchal domination. And so often the sort of less awake men will say to me, yeah, but if just by emphasizing the feminine, then you're imbalanced in the other direction. Uh-uh. It's going to take a lot more than some intentional uses of feminine pronouns in the pulpit, and in writing, and intentionally centering female voices to come to any kind of balance in light of the abuse of the feminine that's happened at the hand of the patriarchy over millennia. So yes, I think we can find that balance in each of ourselves, and I hope that we do, and that all of us, use this little imaginary Shekhinah energy that I've introduced you to, or maybe you're already familiar with today, to reclaim the feminine face of the holy, but also, you guys know what I'm talking about. I could tell Judith, you're an exception here, but that often women who have had to prove themselves in the religious arena, especially ordained women, will recapitulate the very structures that have oppressed them, and by trying to find a place of acceptance in in leadership, roles. So how do we lead in feminine ways? Lead as mothers, lead as women who bleed or who no longer bleed, women who are connected to our feelings as holy, not as problems and pathologies. So overemphasizing the feminine for a time is, I think, what living balance looks like, and honoring the masculine for its great gifts, but not letting it boss us around anymore is, I think, what we're being invited to right now.
Great question, Natalie. Thank you. Here's, this is from Tracy. I also grew up with parents antithetical to organized religion. My Jewish father also called religion the opiate of the people. And my Christian mother called the Catholic Church the richest private institution in the world. You eloquently and succinctly expressed my own distrust with committing solely to a particular practice, yet I also recognize my need for community, discipline, and the boundaries that a group practice church sangha bring. I have been involved with several religions over my life and currently am without any group affiliation, and yet yearn to be a member of a group. So my question is, how do I find that in the community where I live, which is Florida? What do I look for?
Wow. Well, thank you for that. Absolutely, community is one of the things that our souls, I think, most deeply need, and so if we throw out the baby of community with the bathwater of religiosity, we're going to be, jettisoning something that is vital to the human experience. Not to everyone, not everybody needs that, but most of us do. And so how do we find those communities? We can always, one thing I like to say is, if you can't find it, create it. That you maybe do a book study group of some book that you love, that you find provocative and life-giving, and then you invite 4 or 5 people once a week or once a month to come together and explore that. There's pop-up sangha for you right there. The other way that I find nurtures my soul is that I have multiple communities that I belong to, and I don't buy into the entire belief system that props them up. So, like, I'll go to a unity church and enjoy that very much, but I can't, do all the unity things that become just another ism. I can sit with a Vipassana community, but that doesn't have to be my only practice. I can connect with my ancestral Jewish roots during the High Holy Days by going to my local community Jewish center and observing and joining with my community and fasting and praying during that holy season. And it feeds me. And it's not the only thing I do. So I have multiple spiritual communities, a Sufi community as well, the Ramdas community, the Neem Karoli Baba Satsang and chanting and kirtan, big part of my spiritual life, but not my only community. So that's how I do that, as I look for what resonates most deeply with my own soul, and I don't make it my exclusive domain. But remember, you can create community too if you have just the simple urge to do so. I mean, such a simple thing can coalesce a circle of community, like reading a book together and having some quiet contemplative space in that sharing. It's a great way. Thank you.
So there's several questions, and let's do maybe one more, and then
save the others. Yeah, sounds good.
So this is from Linda. A question to consider. Could you speak to the issue of so many souls leaving their physical bodies behind at this moment, I think, and the added chaos and grief this brings to those remaining behind?
Our culture has conditioned us to see death as a failure and grief as a pathology. In this time of recalibration, reconfiguring, reorienting, I invite us to reclaim our inherent, innate, natural connection to death and dying and grief and grieving as a holy part of the human experience. Not only a natural part of the human experience or the experience of living beings, but a holy part. Because as we know from those of us who've sat at the bedside of the dying or have grieved with all our hearts, that death is this mysterious, sacred, drenched space that is a portal place, is a thin place that opens us into the vastness of the divine mystery. And what a waste to push that away. So if in this time we can gently, tenderly, with compassion for ourselves and for those we're holding, say, yes, I will be present in this mysterious, boundless kind of place of free fall that is the realm, the threshold between this life and what is beyond this life. That I will bow here at this threshold and I will keep my heart open. If we can do that collectively, I can't even imagine the joy and energy and deep regard for one another that will awaken in our hearts as we move forward. So thank you for that question. Okay, so is that it for now, Judith? And we'll share
questions, but I'm going to line them up and we'll start with the ones that are in the queue and then take more questions when you're finished with us. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So let's come back into our bodies and into our breath and into this present moment. Take a few deep breaths now and welcome the present moment with your whole body and your whole mind and your whole heart. Giving yourself the gift of right now, nowhere else to be, nothing else to do, just this. This shalom, this salam, this shanti, peace. A poem by Linda Pastan, The Almanac of Last Things. From the Almanac of Last Things, I choose the spider lily for the grace of its brief blossom, though I myself fear brevity. But I choose the Song of Songs because the flesh of those pomegranates has survived all the frost of dogma. I choose January with its chill lessons of patience and despair, and August, too sunstruck for lessons. I choose a thimbleful of red wine to help to make my heart race, then another to help me sleep. From the almanac of last things, I choose you, as I have done before. And I choose evening, because the light clinging to the window is at its most reflective, just as it's ready to go out. From the almanac of last things, I choose you, as I have done before. And I choose evening because the light clinging to the window is at its most reflective, just as it's ready to go out. The Almanac of Last Things by Linda Pastan. So I'm not suggesting that the light is going out. I am inviting us to say yes to this period of liminality, of darkness to our cognitive faculty, of release from our preconceptions and our presuppositions and our illusions of separation, that we can lay down at the feet of the Mother right now, whatever stones we carry in our heart, whatever stories we tell ourselves that reinforce our separateness and our unworthiness, that we may lay it down, that we may, in the exquisite chaos and anxiety that is woven in to our current collective experience, we may recognize the hidden beauty that is breaking through everywhere. Yes, the caterpillar must dissolve completely inside the cocoon in order to emerge as the beautiful butterfly that she really is. And so, right now, the smallest, simplest things, a good apple, a FaceTime with our old graduate school mentor, whatever it may be, these are a couple of mine from the last few days, can be these glorious opportunities to reclaim our joy, to find beauty where we were too busy and too bossed around by that tyranny of tasks to notice. So it's not, when she speaks of the light is at its most reflective just as it's ready to go out, the candle flame will often flare up before it extinguishes itself. Not to see the falling of the night as a bad thing. Like we just have, it's not like that Zen story, you know, of the person who's being chased by a tiger and to a cliff. There's nowhere to go. Like there's nowhere to go. The tiger's on her heels, and then she looks down below, and there's a tiger below her, or a few tigers waiting to eat her up if she goes over the cliff. And so she is clinging. Oh, that's what it is. She's clinging to a branch, you know, hanging over the cliff. There's nowhere to go. And then she turns and looks, and there's a perfectly ripe strawberry right next to her. And she plucks the strawberry and she eats it, and it's the sweetest thing she's ever experienced. Now that story implies that we're going to get eaten, and that implies that it's going to hurt and it's going to be terrible and gory. If we reframe that story again through the lens of the feminine, I already did so by making the hero a she instead of a he, but not as becoming a bloody mess on the other side of this, but rather as simply plunging into a wilderness. That's where we are right now, like the Israelites escaping bondage in Egypt. You're escaping slavery and entering in to a wilderness place, a liminal space between bondage and liberation. And it's in that wilderness that we come undone. And we have to let go of the habits of slavery that kept us in bondage. And we have to be there for quite a while, because a whole generation, as I said, has to be born and die before we can recalibrate and become this new humanity that we are meant to be. And we are fed in those wilderness spaces. We receive the manna from heaven. We don't have to do anything to deserve it. And it's delicious, by the way. It's not just like this crappy fish food. It's yummy, delicious, nourishing. And we are also nourished by the springs of fresh water that rise up wherever Miriam, the feminine prophet, goes. Miriam's well comes into being and nourishes the people just because that's the nature of the feminine. So I want to speak a little bit about this Jewish concept, since here we are in Shabbat land, of tikkun olam. And I know many of you are familiar with that term, tikkun olam, Tikkun is the first word, olam, O-L-A-M. Tikkun olam is, it literally it means the repair of the world or the mending of the world. And it's a teaching in Judaism that suggests that the world is unfinished and it is our task to complete it, or that the original impulse of the Holy One to create all of this as a reflection of its holy self, so it could know its holy self, that in the creation of all that is, there arose this false sense of disconnectedness, and that our human task, our dharma, our invitation is to reconnect that which is disconnected. This comes from a 16th century, I think, teaching by Rabbi Isaac Luria, a cosmological story, like all spiritual traditions have their creation stories. And in this one, not unlike many of the others, the Holy One wanted to know itself. Like it says in the Quran, I was a treasure and I wanted to be known, so I created all that is, women and men and all things. So that was the impulse here. And so the Holy One poured itself into a container so that it could be known, a container like the womb of the feminine that holds life. But the radiance of the divine was too intense, and the container shattered. And shards of darkness and shards of light went throughout the universe, and that is our reality. These shards of light and darkness. And then the Holy One created human beings to to gather and lift the shards and restore the vessel to wholeness, to reweave the what is it called, disintegrated world, to mend and repair and restore the world to wholeness. And we do that through every act of loving kindness, chesed. Yes, that's our invitation. So that's tikkun olam. We are here to repair the world. And the good news is that each of us is perfectly suited to do what is ours to do. And what ours to do may not look like what is somebody else's to do. And it's not like you have to be really excited about the idea that you have this world mending task. I mean, it can be intimidating. And it may involve that kind of dying before you die that we spoke about before the break, dying to our false ideas of ourselves and what we're supposed to be doing. And when you look around the world and you see all these people doing these great acts of generosity and kindness and service, you might think that there's something wrong with you if your particular holy prophetic offering doesn't match up with that picture. So I encourage you to allow yourself to not know for a moment what is yours to do. Or maybe what is yours to do is changing as you age and as you change. But one thing I know is that the reluctant prophet syndrome is real. and it's blessed that all prophets who are worth anything are going to question their prophetic calling. Like, really? Me? You're calling me? I don't have what it takes. I don't have the goods. I'm not enough. Or I'm too much. Or I'm both at the same time. I trust your reluctance. It's much more authentic to me than the ones who say, pick me, God, because I've got what it takes. And so in this time of sheltering in, of liminality, we have the opportunity to not know, to turn inward, to ask with all our hearts, what is mine to offer now? And to be willing to listen without preconceptions. And just as I trust the reluctant prophets among us, which is all of us, all of you anyway, me, I think, I also trust the healers who ourselves have experienced profound brokenness. The wounded healers, rather than those who say, I can fix it all. I can mend the broken heart of humanity. I can repair the broken bodies. Rather, I have suffered. And therefore, the only thing that makes sense is to tend the wounds of the world. Because I know what it is to be wounded. I know what it is to be transformed by my wounds. These are the healers whose hands I want on my body and on my brain and psychology and as my spiritual companions going forward. Just resonating. Yeah. So, let's see. Look at the time. Oh, we're doing great. Okay. I'm trying not to look at the chat box and to stay present. Maybe what we could do right now is just take a moment, once again, before I talk more, to turn inward and soften your heart, deepen your listening, relax that bossy voice inside you that tells you that you're not doing enough to alleviate suffering in the world. And just rest for a moment in the goodness of your own heart. And plant the seed of your question now in the warm soil of your heart. What is mine to offer in this world now, right now, and going forward? Allowing that to be whatever it is, even if it's not the way it's been in the past or the way you thought it should be. Knowing that what is yours to do is already imprinted on your soul, that you have everything you need to take that offering into the world, and that it's probably something hidden in plain sight and something you love, that you love to do, that you're good at, that brings you joy and aliveness. Plant that seed of asking. Water it. Keep it safe. And allow it to unfold, to germinate, and sprout and flower in its own time. All will be well, and all will be well, and every kind of thing shall be well, said Julian of Norwich. And that's hard to believe sometimes, that all will be well, when there's a lot of evidence to the contrary. When the brokenness of the world is crashing in on us. What many people don't know about Julian of Norwich and that famous and beautiful and comforting saying, all will be well and all will be well and every kind of thing shall be well, is that utterance was rooted in a deep knowingness of the absolute unconditional love of God the Mother. Julian lived through 3 rounds of the plague in Europe that took down probably half the population, which means she herself experienced the death of many people she loved. Tremendous loss, maybe a husband, maybe a child, maybe more than one child. What we don't know much about her at all, including her name. They just call her Julian of Norwich because she was an anchoress, as many of you know, whose stone cell that she voluntarily entered, was attached to the Church of St. Julian in Norwich, England. Some of you have probably been there. And so she lived the second half of her life as an anchoress, enclosed in this cell where she could dedicate her life to contemplative prayer and also to spiritual direction or companionship, because she had a window that opened out onto the busy city street of Norwich, and people would come and take counsel with her and bring her food. And she had another window in the cell that opened onto the church so she could receive communion and participate in the Eucharist and all the other liturgies. And Julian made the decision to become an anchoress, dedicate her life to interior prayer as the result of a near-death experience. When she was 30, she was very ill and seemed to be dying, and her mother, was the only other human being we know about besides the priest in her story, was sitting at her bedside and called for the priest to come and administer last rites. And he came and he held a crucifix over Julian's face, and he said, gaze into the face of your beloved, and you'll go straight into the arms of Christ when you take your last breaths. And so Julian did that, and everything disappeared except him, and he came to life. And he gave her a series of revelations, the revelations of divine love, otherwise known as the showings of Julian of Norwich, which she wrote down after she survived this near-death experience. She wrote down everything that Christ revealed to her. And then she, in her anchorage, I had as I said, the chance to translate this. And in the anchorage over those next decades, she unpacked all of those showings or revelations and reflected on them. That's how she spent her life. And so one of them was that God is actually a mother, because who else but a mother would break herself open and pour herself out for love of her children? Christ, the second person of the Holy Trinity, had to be female, was her conclusion. Another radical, subversive revelation of Julian of Norwich is that there's no such thing as sin. Because, yes, we do stupid things and we mess up and we have to deal with the consequences of these negative actions in our lives. What kind of loving mother would then want to punish us later for the pain that we already have to endure by virtue of our own blindness and ignorance and interior lack of love? And finally, she says at the end of this beautiful book, The Showings, that she actually helps us unpack this all will be well business. It's not like a spiritual bypass. I love that term. Not using a spiritual belief or tool to get us away from reality. That's what a spiritual bypass is. Using our religious beliefs and our contemplative methodologies or whatever as a way to catapult us out of an uncomfortable human experience, but rather an invitation to fully inhabit our human experience and bless it as the sacred ground that it is. So Julian helps us understand all will be well, and all will be well, and every kind of thing shall be well. Not as an illusion, but as a true embrace of what is. She says, I marveled at this vision. This was the all will be well vision. For in spite of our blindness here on earth and the foolish ways we live our lives, our endlessly gracious God still holds us in the highest regard. God adores us. She says it again and again and again because Christ says it to her. Still holds us in the highest regard and rejoices in all we do and are. We please her most by wisely and truly believing in her love and rejoicing with her and in her, just as we shall one day come to live in the endless bliss of God, praising her and thanking her with all our hearts. So she has loved us and known us in her boundless foresight since before time began, and she protects us within that same love. She will never allow anything to impede our ultimate joy. And so, when the final judgment comes and we are all brought up to the heavenly realms, we shall clearly see in God all the secrets that are hidden from us now. Then none of us will be moved in any way to say, Lord, if only things had been different, all would have been well. Instead, we shall all proclaim in one voice, Beloved one, may you be blessed, because it is so. All is well. We see now that everything happened in accordance with your divine will, ordained before the beginning of time. So, none of us will be moved once the veil is lifted and we see that love is all that's real. None of us will be moved in any way to say, Lord, if only things had been different, all would have been well. Instead, we shall all proclaim with one voice, Beloved one, it is so. All is well. How do we know that now? How do we remember? In Sufism, actually in Islam in general, the dhikr, the repetition of the divine name, is a bell that we ring to remind ourselves of what is our birthright to know, that we belong to love. And so all of the spiritual practices that are given to us by all the traditions, by your beloved Christian traditions, these are bells to wake us up, to remind us of what our souls have always known. All is well. And that does not stop us from, in this relative world of incarnation, an individual experience, to recognize injustice wherever we see it, the brokenness of the world, and to step in to mend it with love. These are not mutually exclusive. Knowing that not only will all be well, and every manner of thing shall be well, but that all is well, that God wants, our beloved Holy One wants our joy, and there is suffering in this world. And it is with our loved and loving hearts that we have any hope of alleviating that suffering. It's real. Injustice is real. And the love is more real. And we cannot meet injustice, without love. So I want to end by, by sharing with you a couple of versions of the Bodhisattva vow in the Buddhist tradition. So the Bodhisattva vow, as many of you know, in Buddhism, is a teaching from the Mahayana tradition of Buddhism that invites people to set the intention to be in this world as a source of service and caring for all beings. It's predicated on the understanding of the transmigration of souls, reincarnation, that, and of course you don't have to believe in reincarnation in order to resonate with the beauty of the Bodhisattva vow. But the idea is that we continue to be born and die and be reborn until we finally attain nirvana, awakening, liberation, bliss, where we remember our oneness with the One. And in the Bodhisattva teaching, we come to the brink of enlightenment after all these lifetimes of working it out and of peeling away all the obstacles that prevent us from recognizing that we are one with the One. We come to the brink of enlightenment and we opt to return to the wheel of samsara. They call it the wheel of births and deaths and rebirths, to actually stay and continue in this world until all sentient beings are free. That's the Bodhisattva vow, and many Buddhists take this vow. I shall remain on the wheel of samsara until all sentient beings are free. It's a big promise. So I'm going to read you one of the original versions of this from Shantideva, an 8th century Indian Buddhist sage. And then I'm going to read you a contemporary iteration by Roshi Joan Halifax, a woman Zen priest. And then I'm going to read you a version of the refuge vow in the Tibetan Buddhist tradition by Lama Cynthia Jors, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha, as we spoke about earlier. So as I close with these 3 readings, I invite you to experience them contemplatively as a kind of Lectio Divina, a sacred reading, and see if they can speak to your soul in some way that resonates with your particular way. That it's not being imposed on you from outside, but find some source of resonance within you. Bodhisattva Prayer for All Humanity by Shantideva. May I be a guard for those who need protection, a guide for those on the path, a boat, a raft, a bridge for those who wish to cross the flood. May I be a lamp in the darkness, a resting place for the weary, a healing medicine for all who are sick, a vase of plenty, a tree of miracles. And for the boundless multitude of living beings, may I bring sustenance and awakening, enduring like the earth and sky, until all beings are freed from sorrow and all are awakened. May I be a guard for those who need protection, a guide for those on the path, a boat, a raft, a bridge for those who wish to cross the flood. May I be a lamp in the darkness, a resting place for the weary, a healing medicine for all who are sick, a vase of plenty, a tree of miracles, and for the boundless multitude of living beings, may I bring sustenance and awakening, enduring like the earth and sky, until all beings are freed from sorrow and all are awakened. The Four Great Bodhisattva Vows by Roshi Joan Halifax. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. Creations are numberless. I vow to free them. Delusions are inexhaustible. I vow to transform them. Reality is boundless. I vow to perceive it. The awakened way is unsurpassable. I vow to embody it. And finally, the refuge prayer, the three jewels or triple gem. Verses of Refuge and Bodhicitta by Lama Cynthia Jors. Perfection of wisdom, mother of Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, and all beings, nourishing, holding, and healing all. Great Mother Earth, precious jewel of the cosmos, to you we bow in gratitude. We take refuge in the earth as our teacher, the one who shows us the way in this life. We take refuge in the earth as an expression of the Dharma, the teachings of interbeing, understanding, and love. We take refuge in the earth as an embodiment of the Sangha, the vast interdependent community of life in balance and harmony. Living within the web of life on earth, we dedicate ourselves to embodying awakened awareness on the path of healing in service to all beings. We dedicate our lives to realizing our oneness with Gaia, Mother Earth. We take refuge in the earth as our teacher, the one who shows us the way in this life. We take refuge in the earth as an expression of the Dharma, the teachings of interbeing, understanding, and love. We take refuge in the earth as an embodiment of the Sangha, the vast interdependent community of life in balance and harmony. So take a moment to turn inward and allow these sacred words from the Buddhist tradition to resonate and penetrate and permeate your own heart that hungers for a loving and tender and compassionate way to both take refuge and step up in this life, not as a penance or a punishment, but as an invitation to take our rightful place in the web of interconnection, interbeing, to which we belong. Sustained by the Great Mother, who loves us unconditionally.
Thank you, Mirabai.
You're welcome.
So, Melissa, I think you have a sense of the questions. Are you there?
Yes. So the first question is, you talk in your book, Wild Mercy, about how the sense of the divine union can occur when we are radically scattered with loss, grief, etc. Can you talk about other ways to achieve this surrender? Meditation, readings, heart-opening practices. Thank you for all you are in this world. Keep writing and teaching.
Oh, thank you. I think the word was shattered, not scattered. Is that right? Does it really say scattered?
Yes.
Oh, it doesn't say shattered. Oh, okay.
No.
Great. Yeah, in my book, I talk about being shattered quite a lot, so I thought that was what it was. Yeah, so grief and loss has a remarkable way of just stripping us of all that we thought about things and bringing us to a really naked spiritual state that enables us to actually have access to that which our heart longs for. But yes, there are many other ways to get there. And I just, like many of you, have experienced profound loss, and in my case, the death of a child, and in some of your cases as well, I'm sure, or I suspect. And I have found that profound sorrow can be an extraordinary meeting place of with the divine in ways that are unexpected, and it's no fair that it happens that way, but it can be a portal to that union, because a lot of obstacles get stripped away in grief. And of course, it's not the only way. And I would never wish that kind of suffering on anybody as a way to connect with the Holy One. So yes, contemplative practice. I think the reason that there are contemplative practices in all the world's spiritual traditions, every single one of them that I've ever encountered, is because it is such a powerful and profound way to attain those states of interbeing with the holy, of intertwining with that which we love and becoming that. Teresa of Avila, and many mystics, but Teresa of Avila very eloquently speaks about a stage of contemplative practice that she calls the prayer of quiet. And the prayer of quiet is this beautiful blend of intention and grace, so that when we sit down to be in contemplative prayer, interior prayer, we are consenting to be in the presence of the beloved friend and to be in conversation with the beloved. And actually, the faculties of the intellect and the senses and all of the other human bits, the parts that make us up, that aggregate, will be continuing to do their thing. The mind will be thinking its thoughts. She says if you try to stop the mind from thinking during prayer, it's like trying to stop the stars from hurtling across the heavens. That's what she says. So let the mind do its thing, let the senses do their thing, the memories can arise, whatever. But when you sit down to engage in contemplative prayer, you are setting the intention to be with your beloved, and your beloved is saying, yes, I am here with you. Thank you. This is all I wanted, is to be with you here. Then, she says, you may or may not experience those moments, those sweet, delicious moments when your sense of individuality melts and you're just abiding in that sweet stillness. That's a state of grace. But it can happen when you make the space for it. It's like you sweep out the chamber of the heart, the Sufis say, and then the Holy One can come. So contemplative practices, and that could be walking on the beach or in the mountains, without your devices strapped to your body, catching up on communications, but totally being present in the natural world or the park or wherever it is. Any act can be a contemplative act and a gate to that land of deep intimacy with the holy. And all those spiritual methodologies from every tradition are designed to give us that gift, but there's such an overlay of dogma and doctrine and order and control and rules that need to be stripped away sometimes in order to access the jewels that are offered through those practices. Thank you for your question.
So the next question says, I'm not familiar with mysticism in general and would like a good beginning source to read.
Oh, wow. Unfamiliar, did it say? Sorry, I don't know why I'm having a hard time hearing you. I'm going to move this chat box here.
Yes.
Oh.
She said she's not familiar with mysticism.
Oh, gosh. I don't know where to begin. I don't want to sound like I'm selling you guys my books, but I'm most familiar with my own books. So those are the things that come to mind. So may I just say that my book, God of Love, A Guide to the Heart of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, has, I think, a pretty solid overview of what the mystical traditions are and what the contemplative traditions are. But I guess if I were to encapsulate a definition of what mysticism is, it doesn't have to do with magic and altered states of consciousness. It has to do with direct experience. So a mystic is one who has a direct experience of the divine, unmediated through conventional channels, like, for instance, priests or rabbis or shamans. I mean, a priest or a rabbi or a shaman might offer the opportunity to walk through a certain gate, but it's about your own direct experience of the sacred. So a mystical experience is a direct experience of the sacred. And the mystics are those ecstatics who often suffered greatly in all the spiritual traditions, who experienced union with God and then spoke of it, often in the language of love and often especially the language of poetry. Okay, thank you for your question.
So we have another one. It says, can you say more about how our awakening to being spiritual beings can change the division in our political world, given how deep the divisions are?
I don't have an illusion that we can fix the brokenness of the profound chasms that we experience in the political world. So I'm not trying to give you a magical formula or get you to engage in magical thinking here. The sobering reality is that there is staggering discord and division. What I do hope is that we can cultivate humble, tender, feminine hearts, all of us, and be willing to not know, to suspend our judgments about the other and listen deeply to those whose ideas are radically different from our own. That if we can listen with love, those divisions will at least soften, if not dissolve. Right now is kind of the middle of a 24-hour global online event called Call to Unite that that I'm involved with, and I'm going to get back on it when I hang up with you guys. And it's organized by Tim Shriver, who is the head of Special Olympics, and Maria Shriver, his sister. They are, part of the Kennedy family, and Oprah Winfrey is the co-host. And there are people from both sides of the political spectrum and everyone in between, speakers and musicians and dancers and activists and poets. And it's an extraordinary online gathering. My part was last night for blessing the Shabbat with candle lighting. And they have ex-presidents from both sides and people with a whole range of political ideologies who are meeting in the space of the heart, of listening so deeply that otherizing is not possible. And so for those of us who can cultivate some kind of contemplative life and restore our inner joy, that is the healing balm that we'll be able to bring to the divided world going forward. Is our willingness to not have all the answers, but to continue to say yes to love. Each one of us. Thank you.
We have a question from a listener named Wynn. She didn't submit the question, but I can unmute you, Wynn, if you would still like to ask the question.
Video. Okay. Yes, thank you. Here I am. I'm in Black Mountain. Thank you, Mirabai and St. James. My immediate church community is in Asheville at Grace Covenant. And I consider myself a friend of the St. James congregation. I was just typing mine out, Mirabai, and asking for a comment, a teaching that you might have today. Imagining these next few years in light of the pandemic and considering our own lives and needs for community. It feels to me like I will be needing, and many of us will be needing, to find ways to gather in groups of less than 10. I wonder if you could reflect with us about that sense that the next prophet will be in the Sangha, in the spirit of house churches and the small cells of believers or contemplative practice group. Could you just comment on what we may be in for in the next few years? Thank you.
Oh, Wynn, what a great question. I'm not sure that I've really thought about that. And it sounds like you have some insight about it yourself, in that you're recognizing that the time of the large religious gatherings may be over. Like it really may be over. And what a friend of mine called the edifice complex that a lot of churches have and spiritual organizations have, like the bigger the building and the more you can stuff it with believers, the more legitimate your way is, your organization, your spiritual group. That we are having to reimagine ways of being together in spiritual community right now. And some of it is happening online in extraordinary ways like this. I teach for the Shift Network, and I have been for years, and I've often been amazed by the intimacy and spiritual potency of some of these online spaces. And I would caution people to not overdo them, because that's just more doing. That's more of that same driven energy that's been compelling us in our old life. Like to very selectively, with a lot of space in between, for stillness and not knowingness and walks and eating good food and not filling up our days with more to do. Selectively participate in these virtual community gatherings. And when it comes time that we can physically gather again in small spaces, to do so with curiosity and creativity and a kind of egalitarian value on including everybody's voices, so that even as physically our spiritual communities as we've known them are changing and coming undone, our participation in spiritual community is being radically revisioned. So it's like I felt for a long time, maybe you have too, some of you, that religions as we have known them are dying because they're separate and siloed and exclusive. And that the human family is recognizing collectively that we belong to each other. And these separations are artificial and in fact harmful. So the churches are kind of dying anyway, but not spirituality. Like we have a stronger yearning than ever before for the reality of the soul and for connecting with other souls. So I'm approaching this time with curiosity and a willingness to not know what it's going to look like, but to step up and participate and to empower each other as the voices of wisdom that we are, that you clearly are, Wynn, that all of you are. And your voices need to be heard now. You need to take the pulpit, the stand at the altar, and then give it over to the next person, preferably dominated by women or non-men for a while. Thank you.
Well, I'd love to comment that I come from the Reformed tradition, and but have certainly had close friends in the Episcopal churches, and even dating back to the first women who were ordained as Episcopal priests in the 1970s. Part of the richness of the Episcopal tradition that I'm akin to is getting to hear Phyllis Tickle a few years ago, and as a historian, everything that's going on that you've talked about, so much of what you've spoken about today and shared is completely compatible with Phyllis's quote from the Episcopal bishop about every 500 years, the church, Christian church, goes through a great rummage sale and decides what to put out and what to move forward with. And so, so I hadn't really thought of the dovetailing of your work and contemplative practice in quite this integrated way with all of what we know in light of the pandemic. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you for making me think about something in a new way.
Any more questions, anyone? You can just wave. I'll look for you. Great. Well, Mirabai, thank you so much for your time with us today. We had, of course, planned for Mirabai to be with us in Black Mountain for a weekend. And when I had was getting her books and reading them, I realized that she was deeply, I think, connected to Rumi and had used one of the phrases from him in the title of one of her books. Am I right about that a little bit? Yeah.
That's right. Yeah.
So as synchronicity would have it, we have a big art event regularly, ongoing art exhibit in our church. And right when we were starting to talk to Mirabai about coming to St. James, one of our potters brought in a lot of her work and it was on display. And so we grabbed one of the things and put it aside to gift to Mirabai when she was going to be with us. And then synchronicity would have it even more. When she wrote to us, we said, what needs do you have? And only one thing, really simple, but I would really like to have some flowers beside me while I speak, which is never had anyone ask for that. All the speakers, you know, they want water or cough drops or a first class plane ticket or whatever. She wanted some flowers. Very, very easy to do. And we had randomly already had the space. So we were so delighted by the space. So you're going to get to see the vase and it will arrive at your house at some point, but Christy has it and maybe she'll read it to you. I'm going to mute Christy. There you go, Christy. Wait, start over. You're still muted. There you go.
Okay.
Yes, go.
All right now. It says, come, come, whoever you are, wanderer, worshiper, lover of leaving. It doesn't matter. Ours is not a caravan of despair. Come, even if you have broken your vows 1,000 times. Come, yet again, come. Face.
Oh my goodness.
There you go.
Wow.
That
is so beautiful.
That's from Catherine Owen. She's a local artist, and I don't know, let me see if Catherine's still here. I know she was here for a bit. I don't think she was able to stay the whole morning, but anyway, there that is. So we thank you for your time with us, and maybe you would close us with words of prayer, gift.
Oh, I'm just so stunned by that gift. I was so looking forward to being with you in person. I love Asheville, and it would have been such a joy to be there. So maybe one day, with 9 of you, I'll come. Thank you so very much for your loving attention today. So I'm going to leave you with this prayer to the Shekhinah that is at the beginning of my book, Wild Mercy. And this is in honor of this sacred day of Shabbat. O Shekhinah, yours is the feminine face of the holy, the luminous moon who lights up the night as we travel from captivity to liberation, the pillar of fire who guides our way home, the cloud hovering over the mountain peaks, living sign that the drought is over. You are the indwelling presence of the divine. Whenever we gather to praise the One, you are here in our midst. When we cry out for justice, you make our hearts tender. When we stand with those on the margins, you make our legs strong. When we create works of art and parent our children and harvest our gardens, you guide and sustain us. You are the Sabbath bride, the beloved, returned from exile. You restore balance in our relationships and wholeness to our fragmented souls. You infuse our lovemaking with honey. You fill the cup of our hearts, which tremble with longing, with the wine of your answering love. You are the song of our homecoming. You are the Sabbath queen, the great mother, who sits at the heart of the table, tearing off hunks of the secret bread that contains the exact flavor each of us loves best. You feed us all, the proud and the repentant, the believer and the skeptic, from your own hands. Your unconditional forgiveness dissolves otherness. O Shekhinah, we are the vessel for your inflowing. Your radiance requires the clay of our embodiment. Your flame burns at the core of the earth. Your warmth penetrates the seedbed and animates the seedlings. You bless the head of every animal and kiss the tear-streaked face of humanity. You are the vision that builds community, and you are our refuge when the fabric of community unravels. Be with us now as we navigate this landscape of mystery, where your most cherished attributes, wild mercy and boundless compassion, righteousness and wisdom, seem to be cast aside and trampled by imperious world powers, and we are paralyzed by helplessness. Help us. May we remember you and lift you up. May we recognize your face and celebrate your beauty in everything and everyone, everywhere, always. Amen.
Thank you.
Thank you, my friends. Be well, be peaceful, be happy. Thank you, Judith, for inviting me.
So glad you could be with us. Thank you for being with us. And I wish everyone a beautiful and blessed weekend.
Amen. Take care.
Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Satchidananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shantaya Niralambaya Tejase Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Satchidananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shantaya Niralambaya Tejase Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Satchidananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shantaya Niralambaya Tejase Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Satchidananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shantaya Niralambaya Tejase Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Satchidananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shanti. Niralambayate Jase. Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Satchidananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shantaya Niralambayate Jase. Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Satchidananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shantaya Niralambayate Jase. Om Namah Shivaya Gurave Satchidananda Murtaye Nishprapanchaya Shantaya